On May 10th, 1933, in 34 towns across Germany, books were burned. For decades, and even up until recently, much was made of this seemingly senseless act. Commonly cited books that were burned were written by Hemingway and Helen Keller, and even a nature writer named Jack London. Why would the 1930s government of Germany wish to burn knowledge? Why would they want to burn the books of some of the most appreciated people and authors of recent history? This must be because they were simply anti-knowledge, that they really wished to keep the citizenry ill-informed and thus easier to control. Ironic, given the modern-day schooling system in America has done everything they claim the 1930s government of Germany did, all without the spectacle of burning the books. What is of course left out of the picture, and has only recently become widely acknowledged, is that many of the books burned contained adult material. Much is made of the fact that any and all books should be burned. But one might question why, if all their books should be burned, should many of their books contain this type of material? And perhaps this is exactly why modern retellings conveniently leave out this fact. I'm aware the material that was burned went far beyond just the adult content, but for the subject of this video, we will be focusing solely on that aspect of it. As if we now fast forward almost 100 years, and you see this same overrepresentation in the field of adult entertainment. America has become the global hub for this kind of content, but it of course didn't start out that way. We had laws that in essence prohibited this sort of material from becoming widespread, let alone celebrated. Through the decades from the late 1800s to the mid to late 1900s, these laws were regularly tested and attacked. In New York, one of the only places it seems that recorded the religious faith of the obscenity law breakers, it shows a clear overrepresentation of the chosen population. In the year 1939 alone, the book Bookleggers and Smuthounds, written by a Chosenite, records that out of all the arrests that year for those breaking the obscenity laws in the city of New York, 30 were taken in, and 28 of them were you-knows who. That's just the recorded rate. Even the author suspects it is more. The comic book industry was founded and built predominantly by the hats. Many people have the conception that this only revolved around superheroes, but this is not the case. Many comic books openly depicted acts of gruesome violence, and some contained explicit sex scenes even in the 1950s. In a way, this industry would pave the way for the later openly adult magazines. This would only come after two major court cases had essentially neutered the obscenity laws. Both of the defendants in these cases technically lost, but in doing so, they made the courts lock down what exactly they meant by obscenity. William Brennan Jr. wrote the majority opinion, which defined obscenity as material with a dominant theme that, taken as a whole, appeals to the prurient interest to the average person applying contemporary community standards. This was a significantly narrower legal definition of obscenity than the one that had previously prevailed, which had been used to ban literary works of all sorts. It would take another 16 years for the court to determine that obscenity itself was constitutionally protected. The cases I'm referring to here are the cases of Samuel Roth in Roth v. the United States and Marvin Miller in Miller v. California. Both of the defendants in these cases were chosen. With the obscenity laws functionally out of the way, the adult industry began to build openly and drastically. Starting with magazines in the late 60s and throughout the 70s, mags like Screw, Penthouse, and Hustler would begin to be produced and would soon begin selling millions of copies per issue. Playboy, of course, the most famous of all of them, actually started in 1953 but was not as explicit as the later magazines. Playboy, as most would know, was owned and operated by Hugh Hefner until his death. Hefner was a goy, this is true, but a lead writer from Playboy, Pat Learman, outright admitted that he and much of the staff at Playboy were not goys. Here are some excerpts from the article that explores this. If a magazine's history can be divided into eras, the 1960s should be remembered as Playboy's Jewish decade. Those were the years in which a cadre of young Jewish editors, including Learman, reinvigorated the publication, embracing and fomenting the sexual revolution. Yet Playboy has often been thought of as an essentially WASP phenomenon, because Hefner, the magazine's founder, served back then and always as Playboy's public face. And also because, thanks to neurotic icons like Alexander Portnoy and Alvy Singer, it has been difficult to imagine nice Jewish boys convincing a different perky co-ed to strip her clothes off every month. Later on in the article, one of them, Jack Kesey, contributed columns on men's fashion under the ethnically whitewashed pseudonym Blake Rutherford. Another, Hefner's second-in-command, was a debonair New York literature named Auguste Comte Spektersky. Though Spektersky's father was a professional Jewish educator, Spektersky took pains to paper over his Jewish background. As Learman puts it, it would never come out that Spektersky was Jewish unless you put your hand on his throat and said, "Are you Jewish?" In the 1960s, as the magazine prospered, Spektersky's hires included a couple more Jewish editors, Sheldon Wax and Arthur Kretschmer, who quickly rose to prominent positions on the masthead. Hefner didn't object. Many of his closest associates and personal assistants, including Bobby Arnstein and Dick Rosenzweig, were Jews. Further on down the article, by the mid-1960s, Playboy's young editors were charting the magazine's course. The whole staff practically was Jewish, Learman recalls. We were the dominant, probably the brighter ones. Under Spektersky, Learman, Wax, and Kretschmer, and always with Hefner's approval, Playboy at the time began to feature Jewish writers, artists, and themes more prominently than ever before. Literary critics Alfred Kazin and Leslie Fiedler contributed essays early in the decade, while the stable of fiction writers grew to include a virtual Jewish all-star team, including Bruce J. Friedman, Herbert Gold, Leonard Michaels, Irwin Shaw, Bernard Malamud, Philip Roth, and eventually Isaac Bashevis Singer. Shel Silverstein, a close friend of Hefner's, published cartoons regularly in the magazine, as did Jules Pfeiffer, to whom Hefner paid a retainer in exchange for exclusive first-look privileges. And here's another example of a Chosenite changing their name to blend in. This habit has been mentioned multiple times in just this article alone. The magazine included Jewish women prominently in its photographs. In 1968, Hefner met Barbara Klein, a self-described Jewish American princess from Sacramento, renaming herself Barbie Benton at Hefner's suggestion. And the final and perhaps most telling quote, "In that decade, the magazine was at its richest and most complex, not simply a purveyor of airbrushed nudes and hi-fi reviews, but a vital, progressive, and surprisingly Jewish voice in American culture during the most turbulent decade of the last century." Much of the magazine's achievement in changing the way Americans talk about sex resulted from Learman's activities and from his willingness to buck convention while never indulging in Hefnerian hedonism or rebellion for its own sake. The skin mag, pretty much a Jewish invention, used also to push Jewish ideas. Well, this is all beginning to look very Jewish. Screw magazine was owned and operated by a man named Al Goldstein, and he would have some telling things to say about why the every single timers would end up in such an industry at such a rate. But we'll get to that a little later. Just know that in the 70s, this industry grew immensely, thanks to the efforts of the chosen. But of course, the industry had a lot more growing to do, and the hats would have no small part in that either. This is all openly admitted, of course. None of this is a secret, and we are told this was not a conspiracy either. Just a pure coincidence that these people would be so overrepresented in such a field. If they weren't making the mags themselves, they were the ones selling them to you. The top distributor of these new magazines was Reuben Sterman, an early lifer. In the post-war era, America's most notorious photographer was Reuben Sterman, the Walt Disney of porn. According to the US Department of Justice, throughout the 1970s, Sterman controlled most of the pornography circulating in the country. Born in 1924, Sterman grew up in Cleveland's East Side. Initially, he sold comics and magazines, but when he realized magazines produced 20 times the revenue of comic books, he moved exclusively into porn, eventually producing his own titles and setting up retail stores. By the end of the 1960s, Sterman ranked at the top of adult magazine distributors, and by the mid-1970s, he owned over 200 adult bookstores. Sterman also introduced updated versions of the traditional peep show booth, typically a dark room with a small color TV on which the viewer can view X-rated videos. It was said that Sterman did not simply control the adult entertainment industry, he was the industry. Eventually, he was convicted of tax evasion and other crimes and died disgraced in prison in 1997. His son David continued running the family business. Alongside the mags was also the growing portion of films being made, though these would not see their true rise until the early 80s when the VHS and Betamax allowed consumers to watch from the privacy of their homes rather than sit in a theater with a bunch of degenerates like themselves. With this format continuously growing in popularity, more and more men decided to join the industry, not only to get laid, but also to get paid. It just so happens that once again, the early lifers overrepresent in the male actors who openly stated their other reasons, racial reasons, for their joining of the industry. Jews accounted for most of the leading male performers, as well as a sizable number of female stars in porn movies of the 1970s and 80s. Later on in the article, the leading male performers through the 1980s came from secular Jewish upbringings, and the females from Roman Catholic day schools. The standard porn scenario became, as a result, a Jewish fantasy of stooping the Catholic shiksa. This dominance was already obvious by the 70s, as President Nixon and Billy Graham would discuss not only the dominance of the media by the hats, but Graham openly acknowledges their role in the dirty mag and film industry.
It's a very interesting thing, which we can't talk about it publicly, but you know Paul Peters.
Yeah.
He was saying on his show, he said this is true every show, 11 out of the 12 writers are Jewish.
That's right.
In the media now, life is totally dominated by the Jews. Newsweek is owned by Jews and dominated by them, their editorial pages. The New York Times, the Washington Post, totally Jewish. And the ownership of CD and the Los Angeles Times is now totally Jewish. Burrow is Cameron, who sits on the top of it. The other thing, though, is that all three networks, except for they have none men, they have Howard Case men, or frankly, or a crime guy who may not be of that persuasion. But the writers go at 95% of Jewish. Now, what does this mean? Does it mean that all Jews are bad? No. But it does mean that most Jews are left-wing, particularly the younger ones like that. I mean, they're way out. They're radical. They're peace at any price, except for the support of Israel is concerned. The only we don't die on is that, and this is the reason. The best Jews actually are the Israeli Jews.
That's right.
Because Israel, and the reason Mrs. Mayer supports me, which she does, and Diane does too, is for a very fundamental reason. It has nothing to do with, they know the Democratic candidates will be catering to the domestic Jewish vote. But she supports me. Because she knows the great danger to Israel is Russia. point, she's taught, we talked about this. Rabbi's the same way. Rabbi, of course, is a Russian Jew. Boy, does he know them. Now, however, in this country, we must be under no illusion. You're aware of that, aren't you? You're aware of the fact that in the media, we confront almost a solid block of people. They don't, it isn't the agent, and he's the point of the thing. They're after him because he took the whole thing on. And it has nothing to do with anti-Semitism. It happens so that insofar as the media is concerned, the powerful media,
they've got it.
They've got it right by.
And they're the ones putting out the pornographic stuff and putting out everything.
I don't know why they do.
You see, the Bible makes a distinction, Mr. President, between two groups of Jews. One is called the synagogue of Satan. There are two different kinds. And those people, in the latter days, it's called the remnant of God's people, which will be Jewish people. And then there's the synagogue of Satan. And nearly all of your religious deceptions in the latter days, what the Bible speaks, latter days could be 1,000 years, what they call the synagogue of Satan. In other words, they are energized by a supernatural power called the devil. This is what the Bible teaches, whether you believe it or don't believe it. This is the biblical teaching, and this is what I believe. And I believe that they have a strange brilliance about them.
Oh,
they're smart, and they are energized, in my judgment, by a supernatural power.
well, also they do something else. They're not smart.
And you see, of course, Hitler didn't. They had a stranglehold on Germany, on the banking of Germany, on everything in Germany, and the media. They had the whole thing, you see, but he went about it wrong. But this stranglehold has got to be broken, or this country is going to go down the drain.
Believe that?
Yes, sir.
I can't ever say it, but I believe it.
No, but if you get elected the second time, we might be able to do something.
Therefore, two of the most powerful people in the country knew it was the Jews behind the spread of nation-wrecking pornography, yet they felt that they could do nothing about it because of the Jewish stranglehold on the media. A very sobering fact. Understand that at every step of the way, from the stars to the agents, to the production and production companies, to the distributors, to the theaters, to the publishing houses, to those fighting the battles in court over breaking the laws that protected against this stuff, the hats were there every step of the way. In the 1980s, both Vivid Entertainment and AVN were founded. Vivid being created by Stephen Hirsch, an early lifer, and AVN being created by Paul Fishbein, Irv Slifkin, and Barry Rosenblatt. And it's a yes to all three. Both of these companies are still around today and of course have only grown larger and larger. Though only 2% of the American population, Jews dominate porn. Most of the leading male performers through the 1980s had Jewish parents. Leading Jewish pornographers include Wesley Emerson, Paul Fishbein, Larry Friedlander, Paul Norman, Bobby Hollander, Reuben Goatsman, Hank Weinstein, Fred Hirsch and his children Steve and Marjorie, Steve Orenstein, Theodore Rothstein, and Ruben Sturman. In the year 1980 itself, the ADL awarded Hugh Hefner the First Amendment Freedom Award. A later director, one different than the one who awarded Hugh Hefner, said that those Jews who enter the pornography industry have done so as individuals pursuing the American dream. In the 90s, the internet quickly became the new hub for pornographic material, and once again, a hat is credited with this fact. The first ever cam site featuring live sex was called Club Love, created by Seth Warshevsky. So far, one of the few industries to make money on the internet has been cyber porn, and perhaps the most successful of the cyber peddlers has been 25-year-old Seth Warshevsky, president of Internet Entertainment Group, a new media company in Seattle that made an estimated $20 million in 1997 through its live streaming video websites. The Wall Street Journal described Warshevsky as short, scrubbed, and apple-cheeked, and looked hardly old enough to shave, let alone direct a sprawling adult entertainment operation. He's also been described as a virtual Hugh Hefner or Bob Guccione. In fact, when Penthouse magazine went online, it hired Warshevsky to create and operate its site. But he could also be called the Bill Gates of porn, because his cyber peep shows use cutting-edge computer technology. With the profits he'd made from a phone sex operation started in college, Warshevsky converted a warehouse near the King Dome in Seattle into a studio where women take off their clothes and play. The studio includes a bedroom, dungeon, and shower equipped with webcams and microphones, which broadcast the video straight onto the internet. For a monthly membership fee, plus an hourly charge, you can watch the women strip and themselves in real time on your computer screen. For more money, you can talk to the women over the phone and direct them. And if you like the show, you can even tip them. The sites began popping up throughout the 90s but really took off in the 2000s. Here in this video, one of the tunnel dwellers named Mike Kulich, who ran a large company at the time, openly admitted, like many before and after him, how pervasive they are in this industry.
So let's start with, I think Mike, maybe you're the best one for this. Maybe the background of Jews and the adult entertainment industry. Either from the filmmaking perspective, management perspective, active perspective, viewing perspective. Share.
You sure this isn't one you want to take? I have some thoughts on it. Jews in the adult industry, there's a lot of them. It was pretty much founded by the adult industry, or I'm sorry, the Jews. The adult, I had a couple beers. The adult industry was pretty much founded by the Jews. Basically, in the early 1900s, the German Jewish immigrants came in, and when they were trying to get into different industries, there was a lot of anti-Semitism where they couldn't get into normal lines of work. I'm not saying that porn's not normal. So they gravitated towards the porn industry because it's like kind of the seedier cousin of the Hollywood industry, which had already been controlled by the Jews. And basically they pretty much just took it over. So basically back in, the 1960s, 70s, it was founded by people like Danny Mamet, Danny Skura. And then later in the 80s, the godfather of the modern day porn industry, his name was Reuben Sterman, who was actually an Orthodox Jew. He owned over 200 bookstores all around the country. He's actually my godfather, which is kind of weird. Reuben Sterman, what the Jews did pretty much was they revolutionized the adult industry and made it their own. So there was no space for anti-Semitism, and they basically controlled everything. So back in the 80s, the only way you could get pornography was to go through someone like Reuben Sterman, and he controlled, all of his stores and all the stores that he didn't own. They actually had to pay him a tax to carry his product, and he was the only place that you could get product from, peep shows from. And later, what the Jews did was they started the manufacturing end of the business. There were a lot of Italians that were coming into the business, but what they did was they created the manufacturing side, which is the replication, the printing, because back in the day, if you wanted to make a VHS or a beta tape or whatever, you couldn't go down to Kinko's. So what they did was they created all of these companies that manufactured DVDs and VHS and beta and printing, and all the companies pretty much had to go through the Jews. Reuben Sterman, actually, eventually he died in prison. They tried to get him from obscenity back in the 80s, which was a big thing, and it actually still is. There is an obscenity arrest today. But he eventually died in prison because of tax evasion, because he didn't want to pay taxes. So that's, it has.
Yeah, Jews and money.
Jews and money is the next taboo talk. Next year.
Rabbi,
Buy your tickets today.
do you want to weigh in? So let's follow that up with the relationship between the Jews who got involved in this industry because they couldn't get involved in mainstream Hollywood, and their relationship with non-Jews then who were in this industry. Was there a stigma? Because while they did control a variety, historically control a lot of this industry, was there a stigma about those who were actively, let's say, making the films about being Jewish in this movie? Was there a stigma within it? And was there a stigma from other Jews who were in the community? And where is that at today versus historically?
Let me just answer that question quick. Back in the 70s, the majority of the male porn performers were Jewish, and the majority of the female performers were Roman Catholic. And if you look at the names from like the classic porn stars, you got Ron Jeremy, which isn't really Jewish, but you have Herschel Savage.
Is that his real name or his porn name?
That's his porn name.
Herschel was his porn name? That's not the one I would pick.
But
That's the next question. Porn names.
But it's kind of funny because those guys came into the industry, and I actually asked a couple of them, because I asked Ron Jeremy, and I was like, why did you guys, decide to go into the porn industry? Like, what was it that drew you? And besides, like, the obvious, they're like, I got to fuck Roman Catholic chicks and fulfill every I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. You're okay. Okay, you'll know.
Fornicate with Roman Catholics and fulfill like every fantasy that every Jewish boy has ever had. So I think the Jewish performers, they've always been really prevalent in the industry, and even now Ron Jeremy is still, like one of the most well-known performers. James Dean, Joanna Angel, Daphne Rosen, there's a bunch of them. And for the most part, the business side is still controlled by Jews. You have Steve Hirsch, who runs Vivid. You have Steve Orenstein, who runs Wicked. You have me, who runs the biggest porn company in the world. Second biggest. But for the most part, all the business owners are pretty much Jewish, or have Jewish ties, or at some point worked for a Jew in the porn business.
The modern industry is no different than it was a decade ago. A rabbi is the face of nhub. The individual who turned OnlyFans into a site was a Jew. Vixen Media Group, founded by Greg Lansky. Also founded by Lansky, Blacked. The turning of OnlyFans into what it is now has increased the proliferation of this rot in our society to a height not reached before, as it has completely lowered the barrier to entry for young girls who have already been raised to shun motherhood and embrace hedonism. It has turned normal daughters, sisters, and even mothers into online prostitutes. Women who would have never been tempted to enter this kind of business now see financial freedom on the other side of simply taking their phone out of their pocket and uploading pictures of themselves to the internet. The effects of this content are well known to be extremely damaging. These people pushed modern America away from the values that built this country and towards values that have been shown in every measurable facet to be utterly destructive upon the mind, the community, and overall, the nation. This video could go on much longer, as there are endless examples of the hats pushing every single boundary they can in our media. If you want to read more about it in the sources, there is a 9-part series written by Benjamin Garland on the National Vanguard site that goes through each field that was radically changed in the last century. For now, we will end here with a quote from Al Goldstein that will leave no doubt in your mind the intentions they had when publishing and promoting this material. In his 2004 book, XXX Communicated, A Rebel Without a Shul, Luke Ford wrote about a conversation with Goldstein, in which Ford asked Goldstein why Jews were dramatically overrepresented in the industry. He answered, "The only reason that Jews are in pornography is that we think that Christ sucks. Catholicism sucks. We don't believe in authoritarianism. Pornography thus becomes a way of defiling Christian culture, and as it penetrates to the very heart of the American mainstream and is no doubt consumed by those very same wasps, its subversive character becomes more charged." There's way more on this topic than I expected. much of it coming from the Chosenites themselves, but I wanted to keep this video short and to the point to show you that at every step of the way, every major change that got us to where we are today, there was one of these people there doing what they do best, which according to Goldstein is subverting and defiling our culture.